Just to let everybody know, we're going to be recording this session, so I promise to be on my best behavior. We're going to wait just a moment or two before we get started to see if we can catch anybody that might be running late. I was almost part of that category. This afternoon, I got in my car to come to the center here, and my battery was dead. And my wife had taken our other car, so I had to run to a neighbor's house and ask if I could borrow their car, which thank goodness for good friends and neighbors, right? Okay, we've got a lot to cover, so I am going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome all of you for being here. My name is Mike Lyons. I am a SCORE mentor and workshop facilitator. I also happen to be a co-chair for the workshop committee within SCORE here in Denver. My background includes having roles in both large and small companies, typically in business positions and leadership positions. I've been involved in a number of startups and have lived through a number of the topics that we're going to talk about today. My goal today is obviously to share with you some of the information on friends and family financing, but I'd also like to try to make this as interactive as we can, given the limitations that we have with the technology and the tyranny of distance that we're facing here, being different parts of the city. So I'm going to ask that if you do have questions, you put them in the chat or well, let's see, just chat, and I'll make sure that I stop from time to time to make sure that we answer your questions. There will be time at the end of the session for questions and answers as well. So don't fear if you don't get a chance to answer your question. So I think it's fair to say that in the world of small business, raising funds is typically a step that most companies, most small businesses are gonna have to take on. Often, loans or investment are difficult in early stages of a business's life cycle, and many entrepreneurs find that working with friends and family is a good way to start the process. Now, we're going to talk about friends and family today in terms of sort of starting your business funding practice. There are a lot of different stages that we're going to consider, or that could be considered, but we're going to focus very specifically on the early stages, what we're going to call pre-seed, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the idea here is that if you're just starting, if you're thinking about a business that you want, if maybe you're already in business but need to start a project that needs funding, this is the place to be. And we're going to try to make this as informative and as helpful to you as possible with that in mind, that we're looking at the early stages of funding. Before we get started in the discussion, I'd like to share with you some information about SCORE. SCORE offers a number of different webinars and workshops, both at the local level, like this one, and at the national level, so a national presence for SCORE. Many of these are provided online. and are recorded so you can access them at your leisure. SCORE also provides free mentoring to any and all small business owners, or to those of you that just beginning the journey. You can find a mentor or have one assigned to you based upon your needs at the website noted on the slide. So this score.org, find your mentor. Additionally, you can find other services on the SCORE website at denver.score.org. So a question you might be asking yourself as you're sitting thinking about this workshop, or this webinar rather, so why do the SBA and SCORE and others put this on? And the answer really is that small businesses are critical to the success and the vibrancy of the US economy. 44% of economic activity within the country is attributed to small business. 48% of the private workforce, so this is non-government workforce, also comes from small business. And a statistic I was surprised at was that 99% of all businesses in the country actually are small business or considered small business enterprises. So small business plays a huge part in the health and the vibrancy of the country. And it's important for organizations like SCORE and some of our partners that we'll look at next to help make sure you've got the information, the resources that are available, and access to mentors and other services that are provided to ensure your success. So before you worry about writing all of this information down, let me just mention that I am going to be providing these slides and my speaker notes, which I am going to use liberally today, as well as the recording from this evening. So don't worry too much about writing all of this stuff down. But what we're seeing on this slide is really a listing of resources available to you in the greater Metro Denver area, including Colorado Springs, of organizations that are available to help you in a wide variety of different ways. These organizations, these partners of SCORE, offer help with mentoring. They have different resources related to funding, different programs to help you learn information. So there's a wide variety of different resources out there that you should be taking advantage of as you're building your business and thinking about moving forward. The agenda for today is going to be to do a little bit of introduction, and then to jump right into this notion of family and friend funding. We're going to talk about the ask. So how do you do that? How do you ask people for money? That's oftentimes a difficult subject. We're going to talk a little bit about crowdfunding. We're going to talk about executing the ask. So once you've asked, what do you have to do to follow up? What are the kinds of things that are important for making your friends and family funding successful? We're going to talk about some documents that might be helpful in the process, and then we'll do a quick summary and a close for questions and answers. I would like, though, to ask you all a question before we get started, and that is, how many of you are currently looking for funding for your business? So either as a startup or as an existing business that's looking for additional funding to help you grow. You can enter yes or no or maybe in the chat box, but I'd just like to get a sense of where everybody is.
Yes.
Great. Okay, very good. Excellent. Wonderful. Well, it looks like we've got a good mix, and hopefully if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to ask them in that chat box, and we can we'll get them addressed as best as I can. All right. So in terms of funding strategies, you have a lot of choices here in the Metro Denver area for looking for funding, good funding resources. Each of these types of strategies comes with its own list of providers, along with expectations, prerequisites, and conditions with regards to accessing that funding. SCORE offers workshops on most of these strategies. So if you're interested, please reach out to me via email or ask for a SCORE mentor that can help you looking at these different approaches. So micro lenders, SBA loans, banks, credit unions, those kinds of things. For today's discussions, as I mentioned, we're really going to be talking about the last two bullets on the bottom of this slide. So family, friends, and colleagues and crowdfunding are going to be the two things that we'll talk a lot about this evening. And those apply to both startups and businesses that are already in process. While crowdfunding and friends and family funding may seem different, I've chosen to combine them for the purposes of just sharing them because they have a lot of shared characteristics. And I think you're going to find it interesting that people that do friends and family funding oftentimes use crowdfunding platforms to do that work. So it's a good way to consider the two together. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking very specifically about that box on the far left, this notion of pre-seed, where we're looking at friends and family as the primary source of funding. And it's important to note here that this is not huge amounts of money that we're talking about. We're talking about 10K to possibly 100,000. Maybe you've got a rich relative that's going to have lots of funding available for you, and they can offer you a couple $1 million to start your business, but that's an exception. So most of us, when we are looking at getting started or funding a program, we're really looking at that pre-seed, that early stage funding. Seed stage, or that middle box, is really where you're going to start engaging angel investors. You're going to be looking at larger loans, probably from commercial banks. And those numbers tend to run somewhere between 100,000 to 6 million. So it's a pretty broad category, but certainly it's a different stage. And I'm encouraging you to think about these as in stages or different focuses. It's going to be an activity for you to start an initial round of funding. And once that's successful and you've funded your business and you're running for a while, recognize that you're probably going to go for a second round of funding. And that's likely to be for more money. And that's where you'd probably engage a seed stage angel investor or a bank. And then as you go along and your company matures, you're going to find other sources of funding, Series A, Series B, those kinds of funding mechanisms and strategies that will be suitable for a more mature company. In the pre-seed stage, we're really looking at validating our business idea. We're looking at funding to help us understand the market and our competition. We're looking at how costly the venture is going to be. We're looking at things like business models and production capabilities, maybe it's distribution capabilities. We're looking at all sorts of things related to what's it going to take for my business to be successful when it's up and running and progressing the way I hope it to do. So things like that are typically what you're going to be funding in this pre-seed stage. The assumption is that when you're looking at this pre-seed stage of funding using friends and family, you're also have access to other income to keep you going. So maybe it's a salary to cover your living expenses while you evaluate your business capability. I think you're going to find, and my experience is that it's very difficult to go to friends and family or colleagues and say, I need $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 to fund my startup. And when they ask, what are you going to use that money for? You say, well, it's going to be living expenses for this next 6 months while I do this. That doesn't work well. So the idea here is you have to have a parallel capability to cover your living expenses beyond just your friends and family funding or crowdfunding. That being said, you have to have a really good idea of what your business is and how it's going to work before you get started. And I know that sounds kind of like a contradiction. You're going to use this money to help you figure out your business. But the fact is you've got to have a pretty good start before you start approaching people and asking them for money. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So a concept that I want you to keep in mind is a notion that there are two basic, and there are lots of variations of the theme, but there are two basic approaches that you can take when you're looking at funding your business and raising funds or capital for your business. And that is debt on the left-hand side and equity on the right-hand side. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about each one of those and the benefits of them so that you can kind of get a sense as you're thinking about funding, which route do you want to go? And as I say, there are variations to the theme. So these aren't the only two choices you have, but most of your choices that are going to be available to you are going to fall into these two categories. So debt. Debt implies a loan, and usually that has to be paid back with interest. So sometimes you get a low interest rate. Right now, the prime interest rate is about 8.5%. So it can get expensive to take out a loan. But that's typically what you'll do is you'll have a principal and an interest amount that you have to pay back. Repayment for the loan is all you're responsible for. You're not responsible for future profits or revenues. So that's a good thing. You know the amount typically that you borrow. You know what the interest rate is. You can calculate how much you owe your lender. And so it's a known amount, a known quantity, which makes payback a lot easier to manage and easier for your business to run. Interest on debt can be deducted from your income tax. So there's an opportunity there for a bit of a cost reduction when it comes to taxes. And usually, not always, but usually debt is less complicated than equity. On the equity side, equity involves raising money effectively by selling shares or ownership percentages in your company. There are no debt payments typically, and equity investors will maintain their ownership in your company until they exit. So what's an exit? An exit is, generally speaking, either when you do another round of funding to bring new funding money into your company, or when you sell the company. That's oftentimes the inflection point where existing investors will exit your company. It's not unusual for equity investors to want some influence in your company. That might mean a board seat. That might mean requirements that you have to consult them before you make any big purchases or big decisions. So a lot of times, equity partners are involved in the day-to-day running of the company. And so you have to keep that in mind when you select an equity partner. And reporting requirements are often more complex with equity than they are with debt. So that's something to keep in mind. A lot of people ask, so, what's really the difference between debt and equity? I mean, it seems like it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. And there's an analogy that I kind of like, and bear with me because it takes a bit of explanation. Think of a chicken and a pig in a barnyard. And the farmer comes out one day and says, okay, you two are going to supply breakfast. So the chicken thinks, well, that's no big deal. I can lay an egg, and the farmer can have the egg for breakfast. But if that breakfast includes ham or bacon, that pig is committed. That pig is gonna have a problem surviving that. So the idea here is that debt is kind of like the chicken. Vendors, or banks rather, come in, they lend money, they expect it to be paid back, and they can go on about their business. Equity, however, is kind of like that pig. You're committed if you've got an equity partner. Your equity partner is going to live your business more than likely. And so you've got to think about equity and debt differently as a business owner or as an entrepreneur, because the implication of how your business runs is going to be different. Up that. Go. Another related topic that we talked a little bit about, but I want to make sure we're kind of clear before we dive into this, is the difference between friends and family and crowdfunding. So friends and family is money that's provided through contacts in your network. This may include some of your own funds. In fact, it would be preferable if it does. And of course, funds from other people that you know or that you have in your network. Sometimes this involves debt or equity, or just donations to your business. So that's something to keep in mind. Crowdfunding typically are platforms that allow business owners to publicize their products or their services to a larger community in a way to help them raise funds. So effectively what they do is they make their products or their services known on crowdfunding platforms, and then people have an opportunity to invest in those businesses. These platforms, much like friends and family, offer debt, equity, donations, rewards. And rewards is kind of an interesting concept, and we'll talk a little bit more about it a little later on when we jump into crowdfunding. But that's the difference between the two. So I'm going to stop here just for a second. It looks like somebody may have entered a question. No, okay. So we'll keep going. But please, if you do have questions, please make sure you ask them through that chat box. So let's talk a little bit about who counts as friends and family. It's important to recognize that there is a balance between how much you need to start your business or to fund a program or a project in your business, and the people that you're going to approach. You've got to recognize that you want to ask for the right amount of money, but at the same time, you want to be mindful and thoughtful about who you ask and what you ask. So the idea here is that it's really much easier to approach people particularly friends and family, when you have a bit of your own money that you can point to that's invested in the business or in the company. So you want to make sure that you've got your own funds involved, but you also can consider things like your time, your knowledge, skills, and ability as a contribution to the business. Those kinds of things add up and certainly have value. But the thing that brings most value, and you'll find the ask depends on quite a bit, is putting your own cash in the business. You also want to think of this as who can you approach that you know that has an interest in your success. So a lot of times what you'll find is the people that are in your network or in your immediate circle have an interest in your success, but they don't get the idea of investing, or they don't understand what debt is or what equity is. And so sometimes that makes it difficult to approach them. So you want to consider before you ask if the individual, first of all, has the capacity to help you fund the business without putting themselves in a difficult position. This is important because you don't want someone coming back to you after the money is spent, after you've spent the money that they've contributed, and asking for that money back. Or you don't want to feel guilty when using money that you know a loved one or somebody else might need. So there's a bit of an art when you reach out to people and ask for funding. Selecting the right people who are in your immediate circle to invest in your startup. If you can find people that know how business works and have the financial smarts to help you with a startup, that's always best. In some cases, friends and family may not have the money that you're asking, but they may have contacts that they can refer you to. And oftentimes that's really helpful because those come with personal endorsements and referrals and references, which oftentimes are really helpful. So just because somebody doesn't seem like maybe they have the cash, or they tell you no, they can't invest, another good question is, well, do you know someone who might be interested in my startup business? So let's take a moment, and I'd like you to kind of write down who you might have in your external circle of friends, family, colleagues that might serve as a potential funder in your friends and family funding round. So let's think about that for a couple of minutes. Who do you know that might be out there that can help? So this might be friends, it might be neighbors, it might be business colleagues, it might be someone from maybe a work group that you're familiar with, maybe there are industry groups that you're associated with. This might be, people with high personal wealth, like doctors or lawyers that you know. It might be people in your social media network. So lots of different choices that people might not think about when they consider friends and family. And what I want to help you think about is, just because you have that list, you also need to put together sort of what that ask looks like. And so there are two different functions here. So it's good to be creative in putting your list together of possible funders. And then we'll talk about that ask and how to frame it. So these funding questions need to have some careful evaluation as you start to put together your ask, right? So this is before you've talked to anybody. This is before you've gone out and asked grandma for some money, or maybe a neighbor or whoever, well before any of that asking process starts, you want to start to think about things like, what is the product or service I want, or is my business going to be involved in? Be prepared to talk about that in terms that your audience can understand. Make sure the definitions are clear in your mind, and be prepared for questions and suggestions. Always walk into the room prepared, whether it's with friends and family, or it's an investment firm or a bank. Have the number that you're looking for in mind, because asking for too little could limit your ability to start properly. A bigger number may need to be broken down into multiple funding rounds. So think about that carefully. It may be necessary to share with your audience what you'll do with the money. Speak with confidence and share your plans openly. It's human nature to be doubtful when someone is uncertain about their plans. That said, it's also okay to explain your plans and then ask for questions or suggestions. Discuss with friends and family what they want in return. Also, ask about the time frame for when they'll seek a return on the investment that they make. Is there a contingency plan, for example, if you can't pay them back when you expect to? Another question you might ask yourself is, what is the value of my company as I begin this effort? This is an important question for you in your planning, because if you offer equity, you're going to need to understand what the value is of the investment that somebody is making. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. Setting valuations isn't especially easy, but it is something that you need to do as you start to think about getting your company going. Often, a third-party expert can be hired to help you with an objective company evaluation or valuation. Sometimes you can do this informally as you're getting started, and then wait for an objective valuation a little later. It just depends on what you're asking for and the kind of investment that you're looking for. If you're looking for debt, you probably don't need a valuation as urgently as if you were looking for equity. So defining the ask. When you start to approach friends and family about investing in your business, it's easy to look at this as a conversation, like asking for a favor. It may feel like you're reaching out in a familiar way to familiar people, leaning on others to help you accomplish something. That isn't the right approach. And this conversation is much more serious than just asking for a favor. In this kind of conversation, you have to recognize that you're selling an opportunity in the future. In exchange, they're providing their resources, whether that's cash or time or whatever, and a willingness to share in the risk of your business. A big part of your ask is sharing your vision and helping your audience develop an interest and excitement in your story. This is kind of like Shark Tank when you think about it. You have to be able to tell people about your business, get them interested, get them excited about what you're doing, and do it in a way that is clear to them and allows them a way to connect with your vision, with your plans for this company. When thinking about investors who you should consider, make sure that it's in their best interest to invest in your company or in your startup effort. You've got to be really careful to make sure that that's something that they can afford, as I mentioned earlier, and it's something that fits with their financial situation. This ask also applies if you're going to be bringing on a business partner. If you're working with someone in partnership to start your company, or maybe you bring a partner on after you've started and you're looking at how to work with this new partner. Something that's really, really important is to make sure that you communicate very well what your expectations are, what your vision is, what your contribution is going to be, as well as what the contribution of the partner is going to be. An experience that I had back in 2015 is I joined a couple of guys that had already started a business, and they were looking for a partner that was willing to come in and put some money up and contribute with effort and industry knowledge and those kinds of things. What I learned as I got involved in the partnership was that not everybody had communicated their expectations appropriately. And so what that turned into was it turned into hard feelings between the partners. It turned into an imbalance in the effort. It turned into difficulty making decisions between the three of us. So if you do bring partners in, even if they're friends and family or colleagues that you know, it's important to make sure that you set expectations clearly, that you are open and honest about what you want the business to be, and you listen to your partners and allow them to give you the same kind of information going forward. So choosing the right kind of funding is going to be important. And I think we talked a little bit about this notion of self-funding, but that's really a big piece of how you want to proceed with your friends and family round. You need to think about this in terms of what is my contribution going to be. So some sources of funding might be, home equity lines of credit, second mortgages, personal savings, credit cards. And as much as I don't like the idea of leveraging credit card debt, that has been used successfully. And oftentimes that's what small business startups will revert to in order to get started, get a kickstart going. It's important to recognize, however, that whatever source of your own funding you use, you've got to be very thoughtful in how you're going to put that money forward and what you're going to do with that money once it's invested. And the thing that I would encourage you to recognize is that not only do you need to feel comfortable putting money into your own business, but the people that you're approaching for friends and family funding have to feel comfortable also. And one of the ways they're going to do that is by seeing you do the same thing. It's really hard for people, as I mentioned earlier, to put money into your business without recognizing that you've got the confidence to use your own money to do that. This comes, however, with a warning, and that is that about 45% of startup businesses, new businesses, don't make it past 5 years. That's a pretty onerous number. And then when you think about that in terms of more mature companies, about, let's see, what's the figure? 75% of companies don't make it past 15 years. So you've got to make sure that when you're investing your own money and asking other people for their money, you've got to feel pretty confident that you know what you're talking about, you've got a good plan, and you understand what your ask is, what your ask translates to with respect to the people you're asking for. So I have a good story a feel-good story about someone that did a great job. I worked for a gentleman back in the mid-90s. He was a CFO for a company. The company was not doing well. He recognized, however, that it could be changed, and there were things that could be done to make the company successful, but the ownership, the leadership of the organization wasn't ready to take those steps. So what he did was he used his own cash. He mortgaged his home. He leveraged debt and used credit cards. He kind of assembled all the cash he could get, bought a controlling interest in the company, and then started to work to make these changes that he saw were necessary. He became successful. The changes worked. And over time, he was able to bring more people in. Ultimately, he brought a few equity investors in. And then ultimately, he sold the company probably 15 years later to Motorola for a ton of money. And what he did was he created what we call generational wealth. So enough wealth for him and for future generations in his family to do really, really well. So it's possible. You can do that kind of work, but you have to be thoughtful. You have to be careful. You have to be willing to take risks. And probably as much as anything, you have to be willing to fail and get ready to start again. So those are kinds of things that you need to keep in mind as you're thinking about self-funding your business. The next approach is debt that we've talked about already. So the nice thing about debt is that debt can be structured to be flexible. You can look at it in ways that would allow you to maybe have low payments up front with bigger payments as you get going. You can look for and talk to your lenders about maybe doing a holiday, not charging you interest for the first couple of months or the first 6 months or the first year. So there are a lot of things to consider there. There may be conditions or covenants that come with a loan repayment. In one of my companies, we went out, took on debt, and there were covenants that said we had to have a certain profitability number every quarter, every year in order to maintain the loan. So those things might happen if you approach people for debt. But unlike equity, lenders aren't entitled typically to influence the company. So as I mentioned earlier, debt doesn't necessarily bring with it lots of control over your organization. Typically, people will allow you, lenders will allow you, particularly friends and family, allow you to use the money without lots of constraints. Something that I would encourage you to think about, though, if you are using debt, make sure that you pay friends and family back as soon as possible. Even if maybe you have a couple of years runway to pay them back, but you have the cash to do it earlier, my encouragement to you would be to pay people back, if you can, earlier than the term of the debt. A lot of people ask about SBA loans that are available for startups. And in my experience, SBA loans are really not available to startup businesses or businesses that don't have proven records of revenue and profit. Keep in mind that SBA doesn't loan directly. They typically go through commercial banks. So you'll still have to qualify for an SBA loan through a bank if you decide to go that route. But my sense and my encouragement to you is before you approach a bank for an SBA loan, look at opportunities for friends and family funding first so that you can hopefully get better terms for your loan and be able to have an easier time of qualifying for it. So with regards to equity, raising equity early in the life of a company is possible, but it does come with some challenges, as I mentioned. Equity can be described as offering ownership in your company in exchange for something of value, like cash from an investor. What this means is that if someone gives you $5,000, you have to figure out how much that $5,000 is worth in company ownership. So think of it this way. I start a company, I give somebody somebody gives me $5,000. I need to know what percentage of ownership that $5,000 represents. And you can't really do that without understanding what the value of your company is. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times what you're going to have to deal with if you do go the equity route is you're going to have to figure out how much is my company worth. And then when people do invest in you via equity, you can then tell them, well, that $5,000 represents 30% of my company, or it represents 0.5% of my company. So it's important to know what your company value is if you're going to do the equity route. Some new business startups and existing businesses sometimes look at new employees and think of giving employees equity in lieu of salary or in lieu of compensation. And while this makes sense for startups who are oftentimes cash strapped, it also has a downside. Because if new employees fail to perform or if they leave for some reason, it creates a problem if you give those employees an equity stake or a percentage ownership stake in your organization. There are better ways to incentivize employees without giving them equity stakes in your business. So my encouragement to you is if you're thinking about taking that route, or if you have already taken that route, maybe look at ways that you can use other alternatives to incentivize employees. I have a SCORE client who was given shares of stock in a company, and he decided that he was going to apply for a promotion for another position within the company. And he was not given the promotion. And so consequently, he kind of threw his sucker in the dirt and decided he was going to quit. Well, he didn't realize that if he quit, the equity didn't follow it. So there are terms and conditions around how equity is given to employees that you need to be sensitive about if you decide to take that route. What we're going to do now is kind of change course a little bit. Now that we've talked a little bit about friends and family funding and the difference between debt and equity, the importance of self-funding. Now we're going to talk a little bit about crowdfunding. And I'm going to stop here and see if there may be a couple of questions. Let's see.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm here. Sorry, I think my camera. Turn this back on. Sorry. I'm with David Lee and PSI Construction out here in Aurora. Now, I was working with David to essentially buy his company from him. He does construction. Me and my brother are splitting the cost of his company, but we were looking at doing like a SBA loan. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, be important to know a little bit more about the company, if it's profitable, what kind of record keeping it's maintained, if it has consistent revenues and what the revenue stream looks like. What bankers are going to want to do is they're going to want to look at providing loans where they have a high degree of probability and confidence that they're going to get paid back. So a couple of things that you might want to consider doing. First is, do you have a term sheet that's in place with the company that you're going to buy and your brother? Or do you have the terms of the agreement documented?
So we wrote something up, but after we handed it to him, there was we've talked about it and we haven't gotten anything back yet. So no term sheet or anything yet.
Okay. So that's going to be really important because again, banks aren't going to provide funding, whether through the SBA or otherwise, without having a high degree of probability that they're going to get paid back. And without knowing what the terms of the sale are, it's going to be really hard for somebody to do that. So you'll want a term sheet for sure. Do you and your brother have an operating agreement or some agreement in writing about how you're going to split the organization, what your roles are going to be, what happens if one of you leaves, that kind of information? Do you have that in place?
We don't have anything written. Everything is all verbal right now.
Okay. So that's another thing that a lender is going to want to look for is, who are they lending money to? And what are the conditions around lending that money with regards to how you guys operate together? That's typically disclosed in an operating agreement. So that's something that you'll also want to put in place. And they're fairly easy to assemble if you and your brother can come to terms on things like, what's the percentage of ownership of each of you? Who's going to have the majority decision-making capability, right? Things like what happens if you leave or one of the partners leaves, who gets the remaining shares? Those kinds of things are going to be important for a bank to see that before they move on. Last but not least, and I hate to pile all of these things on you because oftentimes they squelch a great opportunity, and I don't mean to do that, but you'll also want a good business plan. A bank is going to want to be able to see a business plan about how you're planning on investing the money, what your plans are for marketing, what your plans are for sales, how you're going to, afford contractors, and all of those things that a business plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about business plans here in a minute, but all of those things are going to be necessary for a lender to seriously consider your request as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. One of the things that I'd encourage you to do, Nathaniel, is, reach out to SCORE and get a SCORE mentor. We can help you with a lot of the documents that I've talked about, but also help you think through maybe some of the issues of, running a construction company. We have people that have construction backgrounds that may be really helpful to you. I see another hand is up there. Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the information. Regarding crowdfunding, obviously it works because you're bringing it forward and others have spoken about it. But once the amount has been raised, do you just turn off that site for you? What do you have to give them an accounting of what the money has gone for, been used for? Can you explain just a little bit more about crowdfunding and how it works once you put it out there? People say this is a good idea and money starts flowing in, and also it's taxable income. So I just need to know a little bit more about what is it.
We're going to talk probably ad nauseum about it here in a minute. So good question. Well, very timely. So crowdfunding is, as I mentioned earlier, is a way to raise money to finance a project or businesses. And what it does is it enables fundraisers to share their ideas with large groups of people, typically online. This can include friends and family, as I mentioned earlier, plus other online funders. Effectively, what happens is the crowd evaluates the idea and chooses to fund it or not. This works best where large numbers of people fund smaller amounts of money. So the way it works is, say, a business owner, we see him there on the left, he needs $15,000. He goes to one of the crowdfunding sites listed on the bottom. He goes through the application process, because each of these have an application process that you have to satisfy. He pitches his idea on their platform. He does a lot of other things that we'll also talk about here in a little bit. And effectively, what happens is people hear his pitch, learn about what he wants to do, learns about how he's going to spend the money, what's in it for them, so to speak, learns about all sorts of things related to the company, and then they either decide to fund it or not. And that's the way it works. So it's a great way, particularly if you're, looking for small amounts of money and you have a well-defined business idea that's compelling and interesting and exciting to people for them to invest in. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. So there are a couple of ways that this works. And I have a SCORE client that actually did this rewards-based funding, which I think is really an interesting approach and something that you should consider. So effectively, what an individual does is they pitch their story, people commit to invest, right? And then instead of doing it as debt or as equity, what happens is the fundraiser, the person that's asking for the money, provides product or services back to the people that invest. So the only money that's exchanged is the money that comes in through the crowdfunding effort. So that's one way that crowdfunding can work, is just through a rewards-based funding model. There's a loan-based funding model that basically works in a similar fashion. People pitch their idea, but in this case, what happens is the people that contribute money to the crowdfunding effort effectively are lending the money. So the expectation is that money is going to be paid back. The term of the loan effectively is described in the crowdfunding documentation that's provided, so people can understand what they're contributing their money to. So it's all disclosed as part of the effort that the individual who's raising the funds provides to the crowd effectively. Okay, so you're telling everybody, you're very upfront what the money's going to be used for, how much money you're looking for, what your business idea is, and then people invest based upon that. Last but not least is this idea of crowdfunding from an investment perspective. And this is a little different and a little less typical, so not done as often as rewards-based crowdfunding or debt-based crowdfunding. This investment-based crowdfunding involves equity. It involves people effectively buying ownership in your company or your startup, and they maintain that equity stance until some exit event takes place. Now, a lot of the crowdfunding sites do not support investment-based or equity-based crowdfunding. Kickstarter, for example, does not offer that. But it is a way to, if you're looking at using some of the other platforms, it is a way to raise funding through an equity-based approach. In Colorado, you can do investment-based crowdfunding, but you have to be, let's see, you have to be, where is the term? You have to be an approved investor in order to do it. So not anybody can do it. You have to be approved as a certified investor in order to do investment crowdfunding. My encouragement to you is if you do want to do crowdfunding, you think that might be a possibility for you, look at the various sites that were listed. So we're talking about Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Indiegogo, Rocket Hub is another one. Look at their sites, look at what programs they offer, and then consider those as suitable for what you're trying to do. It's not just as easy as putting your idea out there. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that work is also very similar to what you would find the effort to be if you were to do friends and family funding also. So, it's labor intensive, but oftentimes it offers the benefit of raising the funding that you're looking for. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Some crowdfunding platforms will require a fee or a percentage of the capital you raise. So you should expect about 5% of the funds raised to be paid back to the crowdfunding platform. Crowdfunding gives business owners the opportunity to get in front of a lot of potential investors who might be interested in their products, allowing individuals with limited funds to also giving them the ability to participate. Because many people see your products or your services, it's also a great way to validate the market for your business idea. And this is something that all of the crowdfunding platforms promote, is this is a really easy way for you to get your business idea out there to see what kind of market acceptance you're going to experience. That in itself oftentimes is worth the price of entry just to do business with the crowdfunding platforms, because it gives you sort of a safe way to see what the market thinks of your idea. So it can be challenging. As I mentioned earlier, many projects don't get funded. And most platforms take an all or nothing approach regarding who gets funds and who doesn't. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. What you'll do when you apply to these crowdfunding platforms is you'll set a goal of how much you want to raise. And most of the platforms work on the premise that if you don't hit your goal, you don't get any of the money that was contributed or that people pledged to pay you once you reached your goal. Does that make sense? So let's say you were trying to raise $15,000 and you only raised $9,000. So typically these crowdfunding platforms will say, until you reach your goal, no transactions occur, nobody pledges their money. You don't get any of the money that people are willing to pledge. So it's an all or nothing situation. But if you exceed your goal, you're able to keep the money that exceeds your goal. So if you set your goal at 15,000 and you raise 18, you have access to those 18, less that 5% that the crowdfunding platform typically takes. Does that answer your question? Do you have other questions related to crowdfunding?
Hey, Mike, this is Brendan. Just the question I
Yeah.
posted was around the debt option for crowdfunding. Is that essentially kind of doing a promissory note, or does the crowdfunding platform kind of manage the debt and the repayments? You know,
So it's effectively a promissory note.
okay.
Yep.
If you had a sense of what percentage of crowdfunding campaigns are successful, and then a second part of the question, a really big one to me, is after that, do you know how many actually turn into successful businesses moving forward?
So the crowdfunding platforms will provide that information to you. I don't have that information available to me, but just a simple search online, looking at Rocket Hub or GoFundMe, you'll find those statistics there. They'll tell you how many people how much money they've raised, how many people have successfully, completed a round of funding and those kinds of things. So each of the sites will be able to tell you that better than I can.
Okay, thank you very much. And you think they'll also say about how many people go on to, because I'm trying to get a sense of, even if you run a successful crowdfunding campaign, you make all the money you wanted to, do many of them go on and actually become successful businesses?
Yeah, one statistic that I have heard is that about 30 to 35% of businesses that have used crowdfunding to get their business started or to fund a program for growth, go on to be able to use other forms of funding for their business. So they go on to do a debt or an equity round or something like that. So it's a pretty good percentage, actually.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, moving right along. Here's an example of how this might work. So, you've got a manufacturer, a person who comes up with a KitchenAid, right? A potato peeler. And they want to introduce this to a crowdfunding effort. So what they do is they consider how much they need, what they're going to use the money for. Perhaps it's going to be for paying for molds for their potato peeler. Perhaps it's marketing expense. Perhaps it's distribution costs. Of course, they want to have samples available, so it's buying the product as well. And so this is a typical way that crowdfunding would work. And if the crowd looked at the business idea and said, you know what, this is great. I want to invest in this. I think this is a great idea. I want this person to be successful. Then, of course, they'll invest in it. And depending on whether it's a rewards based or it's just a donation based, or if it's debt or equity, then the investor kind of interfaces with the company based upon the type of debt that it is or the type of investment that it is. So the example that I can give you firsthand is a client that I mentioned earlier. He started a ski goggles company, and he wanted to raise $15,000 to basically buy some prototypes, then buy production quantity. So he bought about 200 of these ski goggles. He wanted to buy packaging that was necessary. He had some marketing expenses that he needed to cover. And he wanted to be able to pay somebody to help develop a website. So he went out, he went to Kickstarter. He was able to set a goal, like I say, of $15,000. And then the important part of this message or the story is what he had to do in order to get people aware of his business. And this is where the sweat equity comes from. This is where the work really is. It's not going to, Kickstarter and starting a program with them. In order to be successful, I want you to listen to all of the things that he did in order to make his Kickstarter campaign successful. So the first thing that he did, once he established his goal and got Kickstarter to, serve as the platform, he went to his friends and family, his network, people that he knew from his own work, neighbors. He started an email campaign letting them know what he was doing, what he was trying to raise the money for, sort of all the information that we've talked about, right? How much money he was asking for, and the fact that he was doing a crowdfunding round through Kickstarter. He provided links of to where they could go and see his information. But he started this email campaign that took him about 6 months in advance of getting this funding or starting the funding round of just raising awareness. He did a pre-launch video of people skiing and people using goggles and how his product would be, so much better than the competition's. He took a couple of the prototypes that he had that he paid for out of his own pocket, and he had people wearing them skiing down the slopes. He had a personality in the ski industry wear the goggles and say how great they were. Those kinds of things were part of his pre-launch video. He went to social media and he looked up ski clubs and sports activities in social media where people might wear goggles. And he promoted his product there. He went to ski slopes, Breckenridge and A Basin, and he had a table out there with some of his goggles that people could look at. He couldn't sell them because he didn't have inventory, but he got people thinking about, how cool it would be to have these goggles. And of course, when people came to ask about the product, he said, well, you can invest if you want. Here's my GoFundMe page, right? So he did all of this work kind of in advance of going live with his GoFundMe effort, his crowdfunding effort. What happened was he at a prearranged date, Kickstarter effectively put up his business idea online so people could invest. And within 48 hours, which is kind of the high water mark for doing this, within 48 hours, he raised $18,000, which was excellent. So his crowdfunding campaign was successful. He got the money. And the way he set it up, which I think was brilliant, was instead of taking on debt or equity, he did it through a rewards and donations process. So people that gave, $15 got a certain reward. People that gave more money got a free set of glasses or goggles. People that gave even more money got more goggles. People that gave, thousands of dollars got an opportunity to go skiing at A Basin with his goggles with this personality. So he used those kinds of rewards to help people get excited about it. And as I say, he raised the money that he needed. He's still at this point spending that money judiciously to get his business up and running. He's got, the winter months now upon us. So he's got inventory. He can start selling it. And now he's starting to look for small business loans where he can kind of buy more inventory, get his website even better, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of how you do it, ratcheting it up. The interesting part about his crowdfunding experience was this: 80% of the people that invested in him were friends and family, people that he knew by name. And 20% were people that he met on the street, he met online, he met at the slopes, that were willing to invest in his company. So that whole notion of friends and family, that's an important part of crowdfunding. And you'll find that if you decide to forego the crowdfunding approach and just approach your friends and family, you're still going to have to do the same thing. You're still going to have email campaigns. You're still going to have to find ways to get people excited about it, like doing videos. You're still going to have to use social media and approaches that extend your network so people know about you, know about your product, and see you as an opportunity to invest. Okay? All right. So executing the ask. And just a forewarning, we may go over a little bit. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you have to drop off, but we may have a few more minutes. We may go over a few minutes. So these are some of the steps. For some reason this isn't advancing like I thought it would. Here we go. These are some of the steps that I'd like you to consider as you execute your friends and family fundraising or crowdfunding for that matter. You want to leverage your presence on social media. That includes storytelling, constant posting, emails, reaching out to people, talking to people, getting in front of as many people as you can to tell them your story and tell them about your business. You want to join related groups on social media and make sure you post there. You want to use videos to the extent that you can to create awareness. You want to plan events like local hangouts to promote your ideas, to help with your fundraising. So if this sounds like what you would do in a normal business of attracting customers, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what you're trying to do, is you're trying to approach people, to tell them what a great idea you have, and to get them interested enough to invest in your business. It's just like selling to clients. So you'll want to focus on things like newsletters, emails, and regular communications that will be helpful to people to understand what you're trying to do. You want to look at maybe developing a press release to announce, what you're doing. SCORE does a good job of offering some workshops and webinars on developing a good press release. That's something that you might want to consider. And then look for endorsements. People, even local personalities, look for people that are willing to endorse you, willing to talk to your potential investors and tell them what a great person you are, or what a great idea your business is. You got to be prepared, right? You've got to make that good luck happen in your favor. So after you raise funding, so now let's talk about it in terms of, I've gone out, I've raised some funding, friends and family are now sort of asking me questions about how's it going, what's happening with your business. There's a responsibility that you have to make sure that you keep them informed on how things are going for you. Now, this is true for crowdfunding as well as true for friends and family financing. You want to help them understand what kind of progress is being made in the company. You want to help them recognize the lessons learned and the challenges that you're facing. You want to provide them information about where the cash is gone and what your plans are. You want to offer them forecasts for how you see the growth of the company going. So all of this kind of information is really helpful. And you might ask, well, why bother doing all that stuff? You've got the money. Well, the reason you bother with it and the reason you do it at all is because you might need to go back to these people and ask for more money. That's not out of the question. So if you've got a good relationship with them after they've invested and you've kept them informed of how things are going, you've shown them the progress that you've been making, and if you have to go back to them for more money, at least they're aware of how it's going and what's being done. It talks and speaks to your character about helping them recognize what a good investment maybe you're offering them. So we've talked a little bit about this already, but I want to emphasize something again, and that is making sure that you protect your friends and family if you choose to go that route. If you decide that what you're going to do is you're going to reach out to friends and family for your funding, you want to make sure that you have some protections in place to make sure everybody is safe and you minimize the risk the best you can. And the way you do this is you put together documents, not dissimilar to the documents that Nathaniel and I were talking about, but you put together documents that help to frame the business relationship so that people understand what to expect and what will happen when certain activities or events take place. So you want to develop a term sheet. So this would be a term sheet, and we'll talk a little bit about more about this in a moment, but a term sheet is something that describes, it's a non-binding document, and it describes what you're thinking about doing, what the product is, how much money you're looking for, how the funds are going to be used, what the investment.
Hey, Mike, we lost you. I think your microphone stopped working.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, it's good.
we'll just use that speaker.
Okay,
Since-
sounds good. Great. Well, hang on just a second. I'm going to finish the slide and then I'll answer your question. So make sure that you've got your own finances in order, be able to answer questions from friends and family, be honest, be prepared, and make sure you also share the downsides or the downside potential if you see any with respect to investing in your company or your startup. The other thing that I would encourage here with respect to protecting your friends and family is this notion of hiring professional help. That's either a lawyer or a financial advisor, somebody that can look at some of these documents that we're going to talk about next and help you make sure that they're written properly and that you're proceeding in an appropriate way to protect both yourself and friends and family. Okay, so I see a question up here. Let me take a... Okay, can you speak to how to set equity so it changes over time? For instance, stipulate that the portion of equity reduces as the company becomes more profitable and or investors get more return on their investment. Side question, is this a convertible note? If not, what is a convertible note? Okay, so we're going to talk in a minute about convertible notes, so I'll hold that one off. But the question is how to set up equity so it changes over time to stipulate the proportion of equity reduces as the company becomes more profitable and or investors get more return for their investment. So there are a number of ways that this is done. In term sheets, this can be described in investment agreements, stock purchase agreements, those kinds of things. These kinds of things can generally be stipulated. The thing that you've got to recognize, though, is that as an investor, if I get involved in a company, I want to protect my investment. I don't want to give it up, or I don't want to reduce the value of my investment over time. The reason I invest $5,000 in a company, for example, is because I think that that $5,000 will grow in value over time. So you have to be aware as a business owner that investors are going to invest in your company, but they're going to expect a return back. So you've got to be able to think about it in terms of how you do that. A lot of times these are stock splits. There are different ways that you can help an investor keep their percentage of investment, but that's really not the purpose of the class today. It's really more about how to do this friends and family funding. But there are classes that SCORE offers or other of our partners offer that will talk about that. So my encouragement would be to look for a SCORE mentor or look for one of our workshops or webinars that address that for you. Second part of your question we'll cover with regards to convertible notes. Okay. So we're going to talk about pitch decks. We're going to talk a little bit about business plans, operating agreements, and term sheets. Recognizing we're at the bottom of the hour, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. But as I mentioned, you will have the opportunity to see my speaker notes and the slides when I send them out to you in the next day or two. Okay, so a pitch deck, just as it implies, this is all about what you would do to pitch your idea to people that you want to attract to invest in your organization or your company. You want to have a focused message. You want to make sure that you're clear and helpful in the description of the business. You want to make sure that you pack an emotional punch. You want to attract people, and that's what you're going to do with this pitch deck. It's also important to recognize that pitch decks are marketing documents. So they're not binding documents. Binding documents are going to show up later in things like stock purchase agreements or operating agreements. Another thing to consider are business plans. And here I've got two business plan concepts that I want you to consider. This first one is called a business model canvas. And this is a good way to start putting a business plan together. There are 9 questions. You answer the 9 questions. You socialize that with business partners, friends, family, other people who may be familiar with your project or your company, and you fill out sort of in an informal way all of the various questions, the 9 blocks that are on this box. You go from there to a more formal business plan, which is what you're looking at here. This is a traditional business plan. It's one that SCORE teaches often in our business planning workshops. And as you can see here, it's a lot of detail. You get into things like SWOT analysis, competitor analysis, pricing strategies, the organizational chart, those kinds of things. A word of caution or encouragement, I guess you could say, is if you're planning on going long-term for debt or for a bank loan or even equity, you're going to have a business plan with this kind of depth and this kind of detail to allow people to understand how you're approaching the business and what your plans are. So business plan development is important. And probably a key element of that is you don't want to just make this shelfware. You want to build a business plan and you want to keep it current by revisiting it on a regular basis. Okay? Another document that is important in helping protect you and your investors and your partners is an operating agreement. So the best policy for an LLC or small business, particularly LLCs though, is to develop your operating agreement early on in the beginning of your business when it starts. Operating agreements are really helpful because they provide information, as I mentioned earlier, about the basic stuff that your company is all about. The purpose of the company, the management structure, ownership percentages, if you've got partners or investors, voting rights and procedures, those kinds of things. Operating agreements will look at procedures for bringing new members on. It'll describe member rights and responsibilities, those kinds of things. So it's important to keep in mind an operating agreement is not only going to protect you, but it's also going to protect your investors. And last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about term sheets. And we've described them a bit. So a term sheet are really non-binding agreements that help frame what you want to do with your partners or with your investors or with your potential stockholders. They frame out what the terms of the agreement are. They frame out ideas. They're typically a document that gets passed back and forth with modifications to the term agreement until both parties are satisfied that it reflects what they want the agreement to look like. It's at that point that you write a contract or another agreement form that will become binding. So the term agreement is sort of that place where you practice what this agreement is going to look like. They're very important, And oftentimes you're going to have to use these term sheets, as a way to explain to people what you're looking for in your business. Last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about convertible notes. And a convertible note is an interesting structure. And basically what a convertible note is it starts off as debt. So think about it in terms of, I'm a lender, I'm going to loan you $5,000. And there's going to be an interest rate associated with that. So you're going to pay me back the principal, the $5,000, plus the interest. But I have a convertible note here that says at some inflection point, sometime in the future, maybe it's when you pay the note off, or maybe it's when you bring on another round of funding, I have the ability as the note holder, the convertible note holder, I have the ability to change my investment into shares of stock or ownership. So it's no longer debt. I now become an owner of the company. I convert that, the convertible note, I convert it from debt to equity. So there are a lot of nuances to that. There's things like discount rates, which mean I can get a discount on owning shares of your company. There are valuation caps that have to be considered. There are interest rates that might be considered, those kinds of things. But it's a convenient way for a startup company to be able to say, I'd like your cash, and I'll give you a convertible note for some time in the future. If I'm successful, you can convert it. If I'm not successful, then I pay you back the cash and you go away with the principal and the interest. So that's kind of the way that works. And a convertible note is something that's often used in business these days. So a quick summary. Maybe not so quick. Here we go. A couple of things that we covered this evening. Pre-seed funding typically allows entrepreneurs an opportunity to evaluate their startup idea. Debt, equity, crowdfunding, donations, convertible notes can all be types of friends and family funding. You want to make sure you understand your friends and family investors, and it's important to reduce unwelcome events and reduce risk. So make sure that when you choose friends and family to get involved in your business, make sure you set expectations properly, and make sure you approach people that have the tolerance and financial health to be able to invest in. Equity funding will remain, or equity funding will require evaluation of the business, which can be difficult. But as we mentioned earlier, you do want to make sure that you have a valuation for the value of your company if you take that equity route. Debt from friends and family is much easier to obtain than debt through banks, including SBA loans. Self-funding is a necessary part of friends and family fundraising. So putting in your own money is an important part of doing this. And crowdfunding platforms offer startups several good options for funding, including rewards, investment, and debt. Last but not least, leveraging social media, emails, videos, local events, and newsletters are all recommended for developing friends and family funding campaigns. So whether you're going directly to friends and family or you're doing crowdfunding, you're going to have to advocate for your idea, for your business, for what you're trying to raise funds on. People aren't just going to come to you because it sounds like a good idea. To maintain a healthy personal relationship, It's important to keep your friends and family funders well informed. And the documents we described, the pitch deck, the operating agreement, business plans, business model canvas, term sheets, these are all tools that are available to you to help you set expectations properly and frame the kind of funding that you're looking for and the kind of investors that you need. So I'll stop here. Sorry for going over, but any other questions? Let's see. Questions here. Yeah, so Leah points out that lawdepot.com has a lot of free templates. Free templates are great. The operative word is free. But if you're going to be serious about this, my encouragement to you is to, pay the $150 or $200, whatever it is, go talk to an attorney, tell them what you're trying to do, ask them for a review of the documents you maybe get offline or some help to make sure that your documents are well established for doing business in Colorado. There are free legal services that are available from time to time from some of the organizations that I mentioned earlier. So if you look online, I'll send you those links in my handout. But if you look online at some of those organizations, they do have free legal seminars where you can come in and ask your legal questions. You can also go to SCORE or other organizations that offer mentoring and talk to them about the documents. And we can find other resources to maybe help you get them reviewed, or at least make sure that you're using appropriate documents for the tools that you're looking for. Okay. Any other questions? Can you stipulate points for equity and trigger points for equity investors? I have private equity that's asking for a very big portion. So just trying to figure out all options. Okay. Well, two trigger points come to mind that might hopefully be helpful to you, Lee. As I hopefully mentioned, once an equity investor has ownership in your company, there are only a few ways for them to exit. You would think that all they have to do is just sell their shares to somebody else and that's an exit. But that's really, unless there's a big market for ownership in your company, that's not likely to happen. So the two things that happen are you go out for another round of funding. You've got existing equity investors in your company, and you go out for another round of funding. When that happens, what's going to take place is those new equity investors are going to have terms and conditions. They're going to expect certain percentage ownerships. And so your existing current investors are going to get what's called squashed. So their ownership percentage is going to get diluted because you're bringing on other investors. So that's oftentimes a good point for an investor to exit. So a lot of times what those original investors will say, and maybe your investors will say it too, is, hey, look, I don't want to get diluted in my ownership. I'll sell my shares to this new investor that's coming in. So that's one way that an investor exits your company. Short of that, you're going to have to negotiate an ability to keep your current investors from being diluted, or asking your current investors to invest in a new round along with your new investors. So it becomes pretty complicated, and it can be a lot of moving parts to try to get current and new investors to play together nicely. It can be done, it happens all the time, but it takes some work. However, the second way that investors will exit is when you sell the company. So let's say 10 years goes by, 5 years goes by, and you're ready to sell the company. When you sell, your investors are going to exit at the same time. Now, you may choose to sell your portion to some other investor and your current investor stays in, but more than likely what's going to happen is you're just going to sell the company to a new buyer, and that new buyer is going to recapitalize the company. It's at that time your investors are going to exit. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your rather simple question, but there's a lot of detail in what you're asking. So I would encourage you to find a mentor or find an attorney, somebody that can help you sort of think through what your investor is asking for and figure out a way to minimize their impact and their ownership. And maybe there's a nice middle ground for you to work with. I'd be happy to talk to you offline about it, or get another mentor to work with you. But there are ways to make it amenable to both parties. Okay. Any other questions? My apologies for keeping everybody late, particularly Brenda. Okay. With that said, thanks very much for attending this evening. I'm sorry for going over, but I'm glad we had a chance to answer some questions here. Please feel free to reach out to me or others at SCORE and talk to a mentor about moving forward with some of the questions you might have. I'm going to kind of stop at this point. Well, let me do one other thing just quickly. I will be sending these slides to you. So here is my email address, mike.lyons@scorevolunteer.org. Feel free to reach out to me. Be happy to answer any questions offline that I can. Okay, with that said, thanks everybody for attending. Have a good evening, good week, and a good holiday coming up. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Yeah. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.